This story is called Garden Benchmarks. I first set eyes on Miguel on a Wednesday. I had ridden through the pleasures of a glorious Algarve blue morning, sunlight catching on dewdropped leaves, the scent of mimosas strong in the air. I remember this specifically because Wednesday is Fish Fan Day in the village. Normally I cycle down there for 10 o'clock sharp, and I'm always away by 1:15. Once I've exchanged a few words with Isabella and Georges, said hello to the village women, and stacked my bicycle basket full for the freezer, with sardinhas, douradas, polvos if I'm lucky. Always a fine array of my favourite fish, good for the brain, and a treat for the palate. I loved my Wednesday routine. In fact, I love my routine, which Miguel put paid to when he surged through my life like a frenzied chariot, covering all and sundry with the dust beneath his wheels. He was bewitching, was Miguel, in a way that some Portuguese men just are. Not that I think the Portuguese an exceptionally good-looking race, like the Italians, for example. No, it wasn't so much sharp good looks, even though he had thick black hair and dark brown eyes. More that there was a presence and a vibrancy about him. Those eyes were like coals, full of heat and energy. That carefully clipped hair made you want to reach out and stroke it, just to check if it felt as velvety as it looked. I was ready for Miguel, or at least someone like him. I love living in Boca, sleepy little fishing village, adorable cliff-top walks, wizened little men in pork pie hats congregating at the bus stop, women with teeth missing but ever-present smiles. Beautiful, safe. A haven I finally retreated to after visiting it for years, being captivated by the bejewelled ocean at its simplest, the friendly people, the fabulous food. Yet although I welcomed retreat, and certainly didn't want to get embroiled in the increasing tourist trade, life could be a little dull. A new arrival generated curiosity and excitement, just as mine had done 10 years before. Miguel's presence was both alluring and disturbing. Not many younger Portuguese men went shopping for the fish at the van, although you might see Christophe from the restaurant up the hill, though rarely. I heard Miguel asking who I was in a voice that hummed, assuming that I didn't understand. And no, I'm not fluent, but I knew enough to get the gist. Quem é a senhora? Ela é bonita. Isabella was only too happy to reply at length, while Georges wrapped me my fish. Then Miguel turned his charms toward me in a perfect English accent. Good morning. My name is Miguel. He smiled. I am told that you are a lady of talent as well as of beauty. He held out his hand to mine. Isabella beamed beside him, nodding towards me, looking proud. Bom dia, senhor. I took the proffered hand. Yes, I'm Rosie, and I'm a sculptress. Your first time in the village? No, far from it. My uncle is Zé Manuel. He owns the restaurant, Estrela. I used to visit often when a child. I am from Lisboa. He knew that he had my attention. But it's been a while, and now I work in psychologia. I have been working in England for 6 years, in London, and now I come back. I am here to write a book. Oh, I rejoined, a book. We chatted a little more while villagers came and went, slowly, calmly, the sensible approach to shopping now that the fish were already dead, a pace of life that the English can find so difficult to accept. I kissed Isabella goodbye, marked my leave with a friendly ciao, then cycled back along the old coast road and up the hill, up the track to my own little corner of paradise, Casa da Calma. I packed the fish into the freezer, each to its allotted space, and contemplated the new arrival in the village. What a surprise! Just when you think you have everything under control. I drank water from a half-litre glass, washed it out thoroughly, using the bottle brush 3 times. I put on my working gear, a thin cotton oversuit, washed my hands and went into my workshop. Miguel might have intrigued me, but work was calling. I immersed myself in it, mixing papier-mâché, playing layer upon careful layer of gooey mulch, covering over the wireframe of a phoenix, a piece that I was doing for Lorindu, the young priest who worked with the local orphanage in Lagos. It was to be auctioned to raise money for the running of the place, all privately funded. I knew already that there were 1 or 2 well-known locals who were going to bid whatever it took. One with a cliff-top villa over in the west, one with a house in the contrived conurbations of Villamoura. It would look well when set in gardens which overlooked the sea, and I had my fingers crossed for the western bidder. Or a surprise last-minute runner. Anyway, I was enjoying its creation, my phoenix, and had organised a schedule which would have it easily ready for the auction at the Christmas fair. The next day I was busying away when I heard my name called. I was surprised. No one usually called on a Thursday. I peeled off my latex gloves, folded them before depositing them in my bin, and walked through to the front door of the house. I pulled open its heavy weight with interest. There was Miguel, his 6-foot frame clad carefully in designer combats and a crew-neck sweatshirt, grinning like crazy and smelling like cinnamon. My heart skipped a beat. Steady, Rosie. I took a deep breath. Steady. Miguel, I exclaimed. He nodded, so sure of himself. Bon dia, Rosie. What can I do for you? He hesitated. It's like this. I am curious to see your garden and your sculptures. He caught my hesitation and was quick to respond. I'll give him that. He knew his body language all right. Or perhaps another time, if you're busy? I considered briefly, nodded slowly, tempered my racing pulse. Okay. I nearly asked him in there and then, but that would have interrupted my routine. Thursdays were for sculpture only. My lunch was already prepared, my table neatly laid, cutlery carefully framing my Portia's pottery plate. I couldn't disturb it now. How about tomorrow at 1? He nodded. And then, before I knew it, I had to go further and burst through my carefully constructed boundaries. Perhaps you'd like to come to lunch? Miguel smiled broadly. I really had said that out loud. Of course, that would be wonderful. How kind of the Signora. What is it about the slight difference in syntax that just adds sex appeal to a spoken language, no matter how perfect the accent? Whatever it was, it worked, and Miguel knew that. He grinned, stepped forward and kissed me lightly and politely on both cheeks, and then he left. I closed my door and returned to work. The next day I organised carefully. I laid the table with my prettiest plates, glasses just to the right, red linen napkins from Casa, symmetrical in silver rings, to the left. I made guacamole, prepared rocket salad, washed fresh tuna, roasted garlic. Then it was on with my gloves and off to work. I was into the final wrap, precision propelling me toward perfection. At midday I stopped, discarded my gloves, and let warm water and jasmine soap soothe the skin of my hands as I washed and dried, before smothering them in hand cream. Then I showered. I dressed in a scarlet button-down jumpsuit and bandana and wore matching nail varnish and lipstick. I showcased my green eyes with dark shadows, eyeliner, mascara. I let my hair dry loosely, natural. When the doorbell rang, I counted to 3, opened up, and invited Miguel inside. I offered him a drink. He took red wine while I settled for spring water. Friday was detox day. Over lunch, I discovered more about Señor Miguel. He was writing a book on obsessive-compulsive disorder, a syndrome where people feel compelled to arrange their lives by different kinds of rotes and rituals. I listened, fascinated, as he told me about his research. So why do people do this? I asked him as I filled his glass carefully with wine, stopping just 4 centimetres below the top. I had always had a good eye for space and distance. All kinds of reasons, he said. Often it is because of some kind of childhood trauma, perhaps abuse, or a death in the family. When the child is not fully recovering from the chaos that is the first stage of grief, they try to control their world, their environment, and their routine. A break in the routine can be very frightening, as if it is again the sense of loss. Fascinating. I took exactly 2 forkfuls of salad, which I arranged symmetrically on my plate. Perhaps, he gave me a slightly quizzical look. But enough about me. Tell me about your work. And so I did. I told him much more than I had meant to, actually, about how I had always loved working with my hands, shaping perfection, creating order out of disorder. He asked about my inspiration, and I explained to him how I'd learned my art and my love of gardens as a child, living with my grandparents after the untimely death of my parents. I would play in the garden day by day, learning from my grandma how to grow flowers from seed, what to plant when, how to mix the plants so that you had an all-year colour show. And Grandad showing me the garden from a different angle, behind the rhododendrons in the greenhouse on the other side of the sundial. I used to stare at that sundial when I was with Grandad and get lost in it to take me away, vowing that one day I would make sculptures like that to put into a garden of my own. Suddenly I felt exposed, as if Miguel's beautiful brown eyes were boring into my soul. I cleared the table, carried the crockery to the sink, rinsed it in hot and then cold, and stacked the dishwasher. I washed and creamed my hands and offered to take Miguel to my studio. I worked in an outbuilding, one of many that had come with the old house. I had skylighted the roof to let in the wonderful Algarve light and whitewashed the thick walls, which I jet wash every Sunday. I use a cement mixer painted deep crimson for my papier-mâché. Paper was stored in boxes arranged along the south wall. The opposite wall is shelved for glues, paints, wire, palette knives, strong scissors, all colour-coded and in order. On the wall between, I'd hung a collage of photographs of my work. In the old pigsty at the end, I had a tank of formaldehyde for my little sideline of taxidermy. I'd had a bit of a practice after I'd found the body of an owl some years before, so lovely that it had to be preserved. I'd done a bit in the UK too. I didn't do much anymore, but I liked to have the option. My phoenix stood in the middle of the room, a majesty of a bird. Miguel gasped. Awesome! He circled the piece, his eyes piercing it with that clever psychological brain, then raised his hand as if to stroke it. Don't! I shouted. He jumped. Sorry, he said. He looks so inviting. I'm sorry too. It's just that I don't want any fingerprints on it at this stage. Of course. Forgive me. Miguel looked around, his eyes alighting then on the centrepiece of my collage, a sculpture called Nova Vida. It means new life. Hardly an original title, but it is undoubtedly one of my most perfect works. my only full-size sculpture of a human being. This is splendid. Miguel stood rapt, taking in the proportions, the lines and the elegance. Do you sell your work? Sometimes, I rejoined. I do commissions, but mostly it's for pleasure, and sometimes as gifts. I focused on the photograph, but I keep this one for myself. It's rather special. That I can see. Miguel was impressed. Would you like to see the real thing? Damn it, I was gratified by his interest. It's in the garden. Naturally, Miguel said yes. I took him outside into my beloved garden, through the natural arbour created by the tough old azalea, which flirted to the point of entwining with the high branches of the hibiscus, crimson upon crimson. We walked on through the traditional Portuguese plants blending with my own special mix, and bougainvillea neighbouring a silver pear tree with a luminescent bark. White flowers of Philadelphus vied with purple daisies, edging the path which leads to my tiled stone bench. And before the bench, my beautiful marble sundial, the fulfilment of that childhood promise to myself. And then, flanked by the fragrant blooms of the jasmine bush, Nova Vida, in all its glory, perfectly proportioned, looking over my domain, yet trapped forever within it. Miguel was entranced. He wanted to know how I'd made it, from inception to completion. I told him what I could. By now my schedule had been stretched enough and anxiety edged in. I led Miguel back to the house, poured him some coffee, and explained that I had a routine to keep to. He was gracious and left by 3 o'clock. I meditated for a while, slowing my heart rate, relaxing my muscles. I resumed my work, and by evening equilibrium was restored. Miguel rang me the following Monday to say how much he had enjoyed himself. He invited me to lunch at his apartment on the Friday. I accepted, looked forward to it, disciplined my time and my actions until the allotted appointment. He did himself proud, Miguel, providing avocados stuffed with pine nuts and watercress and tomato salad, delicious, salty, barbecued carapau. I was impressed so much that I bent my own rules. I took a large glass of Vinho Verde, despite it being detox day. Soon I was laughing and flirting outrageously, feeling freer than for a long time. So when Miguel kissed me, I responded with a passion that I hadn't felt in years. I welcomed the warmth of his large, lithe body, the touch of sensitive hands, and then a blur, and I don't quite remember how it was, that suddenly I was astride him on the living room rug, naked, abandoned, loving the intimacy of sex. But I remember that in the seconds after my climax, I began to feel frightened, and Miguel's handsome face metamorphosed beneath me into something ugly and old, lecherous and predatory, just like Grandad's used to look. I froze in horror as nature took its course, and Miguel shuddered into submission below me. Afterwards, he asked me what was wrong. He laughed. "You were ready for that, Rosie," he said. "Why so stiff all of a sudden?" I hated him then. You were ready for that, indeed. Who the hell did he think he was? I excused myself. A woman should always be polite, Grandma had said. And I went to the bathroom where I was sick before I wiped myself as best I could and washed in the bidet over and over. I wrapped myself in a towel and went back to the living room to find my clothes. Mercifully, Miguel had gone into the kitchen to make coffee, so I dressed quickly and hid my shame. I went to him. "Look, I really have to go now," I said. I was feeling calmer, but I knew there were things that I needed to do, things that I could only do in the privacy of my own home. That really was a lovely lunch. Miguel looked bewildered, but he didn't try and force me to stay. I walked quickly back to my lovely little house, breathing the fresh sea air, remembering how I used to visit here as a tourist and to believe it was idyllic, which it was and is, only now I was finding that bad things happen in paradise as well as in hell. Once home, I locked myself in, stripped off my clothes and cleaned off my nail polish, one nail at a time, little finger first on each hand, and then carefully one by one. I turned on the shower and revelled beneath its jets, hot, cold, splish-splash, until I felt clean. I wrapped myself in my ivory kimono and meditated. Calma, I told myself. Calma. Slowly, gently, I regained control. Then I could remember the lunch with pleasure and blank out the details of my abandonment. We began our ritual then, Miguel and I. He phoned on Mondays and I went to his house for lunch on Fridays. Then we would have sex, and it was always the same. Exciting, full of abandonment. And then I would shut my eyes at the end so that I didn't have to see his face. Then I would leave. I have to say that Miguel was very understanding. He didn't really probe me too much. He needed space for his writing. He knew I had my routine. Once or twice he tried to press me to stay on for Friday evening. And once he looked at me quite sadly and said, "You know, querida, you can trust me." His eyes were deep, gentle. "I can see that you have let me into something personal." That frightened me. No, I said, "I have to go." "Okay," he kissed my hand. "As you wish." He always saw me to the door and kissed me on both cheeks before I left to go home and perform my ablutions. In its way, everything was working a treat. And then he went and blew it. It was a Thursday, and Miguel came to my studio unannounced. He made me jump as he shouted my name. "Rosie, it's me, it's me." I turned to see him standing in my doorway, smiling at me, holding a large envelope in his hand. I was horrified. "Miguel!" I was furious. "It's not Friday." "I know," he said, "but now I have my book proposal back from the publisher. I have been accepted." I couldn't see how this had anything to do with me, and I felt my breathing getting shallow. I moved toward him. I wanted him out of my studio. "But it's not Friday," I said. "Rosie." He moved toward me. I know, but I am so excited. I had to tell someone. And you, Rosie, you are very special to me. He moved quickly toward me. He went to put his letter on my shelf, the one with the tools on, and in his haste he knocked down my box of sharp scissors and knives, scattering them all over the floor. I rushed to pick them up. I felt sick, such disorder in my studio. Miguel stupidly tried to help, and I was holding up the biggest scissors as he bent toward me. I moved my arm to warn him off, but he went and moved as well, and then his face changed to surprise as I felt a crunch, heard a squelch, and suddenly there was red everywhere, all over my studio and in front of my eyes. I panicked and pushed the scissors deeper and deeper into him until sickeningly blood was coming out of the corners of his mouth. And then I stopped. The mess was horrendous, very upsetting. All that planning, that care, and silly old Miguel had destroyed it all in seconds. I took deep breaths. I went to my sink, took off my disposable overall and dumped it into a large plastic bag and then into my red plastic bin. I changed my gloves. I donned a fresh overall. There. Then I took a large sheet of plastic wrapping, laid it onto the floor and rolled Miguel onto it. He was heavy, but then I'm strong. I hauled him to one side and swilled and scrubbed the floor. All my scissors and knives went into the steriliser. Miguel's envelope now had to be dealt with, its angular lines careless on my shelf. I took out the letter, of course, and read the title. It was from a UK publishing house and was headed Self-Love, How to Treat the Obsessive-compulsive from a Basis of Unconditional Acceptance. How bizarre, I remember thinking, and stuck both letter and envelope in the stove in which I burn excess paper. They were soon gone. I was most put out. Tomorrow should have been Miguel Day, not today. I should have had my outlet of pleasure and then been allowed to come home and recover. The weekend should have seen the final glaze of my phoenix. Now I would have to be working on a different piece, and quickly. My meditations and sleep schedule might have to be interrupted. It seemed so unfair. Later I would have to dip Miguel in formaldehyde. Thank goodness I had kept the tank. I knew the drill from when I had seen to Grandad. Once preserved, I would mummify Miguel and encase him in strong wire netting. Then the fun part, the coating of the core body with layers and layers of glorious papier-mâché. I wondered how I would finish him off. Nova Vida was a study in white. Perhaps this one should be brown, chocolate brown, to match the softness of Miguel's eyes. Whatever I decided, I knew that he would not be for sale. No, I would glaze him and mount him in the garden. I was never questioned about his disappearance, although I know that the GNR, the Portuguese police, were brought in at one time when his uncle reported him missing. The gossip at the fish farm was that, according to his Uncle Zé, Miguel had always been a bit strange, intelligent, sensitive, a bit impulsive. There was talk of a woman, although apparently Miguel had never said who. So they assumed that he had gone off on an impetuous trip, that he would be back, and they would keep his clothes and his modern laptop for when he returned. When Lorindo came round some weeks later, the springtime nights becoming light now, to thank me for the phoenix, it had raised 40,000 euros, and to my delight had been won by the man with the sea view. We took tea in the garden. The young priest was the first to see that Nova Vida had been joined by Beijinhas. It was a lovely warm spring day, and we could smell the honey fragrance of the winter sweets. The hibiscus was just blooming after its winter rest, and the bougainvillea attracting an early butterfly or two. Senor Lorindo loved the English tea that I made and sat back appreciatively. "What a wonderful new sculpture," he cooed. "It looks so well amongst the flora, and with your first piece. You know, we are so honoured to have you in our community." He took a sip from a china rose damask cup from my grandmother's collection. "And it is so English of you to make your garden so very personal, don't you think?" I murmured a gracious agreement. "You're so English, and yet you live here with us so very well." He paused. "Easier than some of the Portuguese. Take that Miguel, the son of Zé Manuel's poor brother. He comes here, then when he has enough, he just goes without a word. He is a mystery." "Sim, senor, a total mystery." I nodded, and then I teased him, though the humour was probably lost on dear Lorindo. "More tea, vicar?" I smiled at the Portuguese priest and noticed how he just had one hair out of place. But never mind. Soon he would leave, and then I could get back to my routine.